Hello again, Chapter 11, Video 3. We're wrapping up Sikhism, and we just finished talking about the Singh. I just want to reiterate one more time that this has become a mainstream sort of form of Sikhism. So there are some other groups within Sikhism. You can read about them in your book. But the majority of Sikhs today are part of what we call the Khalsa, which just refers to this group who were once these Singhs. I mean, they aren't warriors necessarily today, but they are part of this lineage, and they perform the rituals and so forth associated with it. Now, we can go on about the beliefs and practices of Sikhism a little bit, but a lot of the stuff that we can mention, it's things that we've already seen. They have temples, they have initiation ceremonies, they have the idea of the religious community that you can turn to. They have daily prayers, they have communal meals, they have hymn singing. But these are things that you've encountered from other chapters. And that should come as no surprise. We've covered a ton of religions now, and there's not that many new ways to innovate religions. So it's not at all surprising that these things keep showing up in various different ways. What I'd rather do with these last several minutes is to talk a little bit about the last 150 years or so, and the way that Sikhism has been altered by changes in the modern world, basically. I told you when we first started talking about Sikhism that it's associated with a region called Punjab. Punjab, as I said, is partially in India today and partially in Pakistan. And it was part of India, or what we today call India, back in the mid-19th century when Britain took control there. And British control of India was a very significant influence in terms of, well, both the history of Britain and of India, but particularly of India. And during this time period, starting in about 1850, 1849 or so, Sikhs had a relatively successful time of finding positions within the British-ruled governments. What I mean by that is that they found work. They found work in traditionally logical sorts of positions like bodyguards, military, police, and also administrative positions, and then of course countless other people had whatever their specific jobs were. But these areas had quite a few Sikhs working in these roles, and they make sense, right? Police and military and bodyguards, those are all the sorts of roles you would expect somebody to take if they had committed to protecting the defenseless and things like that. It's just that sort of work. And by the way, that's still true today. If you look at the statistics, the number of Sikhs in the military in India is hugely overrepresented in terms of their percentage of the population. They make up much more of the military than they do of the population. So there's still a tradition today where a lot of Sikhs go into this sort of work because it's part of their sort of role, their view of their role within the world. So Britain takes control in the mid-19th century. Sikhs find some positions as leaders within this time period, but it's really 100 years later that we're interested in, when Britain leaves India, and there's a new line drawn on maps that divides India, the modern country India, from Pakistan. And this is a creation of the mid-20th century, this decision that these will henceforth be two separate countries. And the reason for this was political, certainly, but it was divided intentionally along kind of religious lines, with the idea being that Pakistan would be a Muslim country and India would be a Hindu country. Well, the problem with this, for our point of view discussing Sikhism, is that Punjab is right in the middle. It's right split by this dividing line, and it doesn't exist the way it used to anymore. It's now divided in parts in two countries and didn't get a place of its own. So Sikhs shuffled about. They moved. Some moved from one side to another. Many ended up in India. But there was a real sense of discontent, a real sense of betrayal and unfairness about this, about these countries being made for these two large groups, but nothing being provided for the Sikhs. And over the course of the next few decades, there's a trajectory of militants and protest against this injustice. And it eventually comes to be violent protest and lashing out against the Indian government, particularly by Sikhs who believed that they needed a place of their own, they needed equal rights, they needed protections from the government that they weren't getting, and so forth. Well, this really comes to a head in the 1980s with something called Operation Bluestar. Operation Bluestar was a military operation called out by the Prime Minister of India, who was a woman named Indira Gandhi, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi. And Indira Gandhi had intelligence that said that some of these militant leaders, which in fairness are probably what we would call terrorists today. We used to call them freedom fighters and things like that. But nowadays the terminology of somebody who attacks a government without a government of their own, pretty much what we're calling terrorists. So this group of people with weapons who are pissed at the government are supposedly hiding out. Some of their leadership and some of their weapons are stashed at a temple, the most important temple in Sikhism, the Golden Temple. And the government decides, Indira Gandhi decides to send a military operation to go take this place, recover the weapons, capture or kill the militants that are there, and this happens. And it's quite violent. It's a big operation. It's not just, you know, SWAT teams with submachine guns. It's big military vehicles, aircraft, and so forth. And they do a very destructive number on this temple. And by the way, the intelligence is good. It's not like this is some screw up. There were militants hiding out there. There were weapons stashed there, and so forth. But it's a very violent exchange. And it pisses off a lot of people who are Sikhs, who were either on the fence or were not angry with the Indian government and so forth. A lot of them are pushed over by this because they see this as a real slap in the face to Sikhism, as a real desecration of their sacred temple, of their sacred space, for political reasons and for secular reasons, non-religious reasons. And in the course of this, over the next few months, about 4 months later, Indira Gandhi, this prime minister, is assassinated, killed by her own bodyguards, who are Sikhs, and who are now committed to militancy and are violently opposed to her government and her choices, and so forth. Well, this then creates a counterswing, where a huge uprising of violence in India towards Sikhs breaks out, and this results in quite a bit of violence in the streets. I mean, like riot kind of violence, beating people to death sort of violence. And you end up in a situation about 25 years ago now, where there was a really difficult position for Sikhs in India, and a lot moved away during that time period to other parts of the world. You can find Sikhs in any kind of urban center in the world today. Certainly there are Sikhs in Omaha, but there are many Sikhs in places like New York and Paris and so forth too. So what you end up with is a dispersed population of Sikhs out there in the world looking for their own place. Now there's a couple different endings to this story. Well, there really isn't an ending, but there's a couple little codas that are worth mentioning. Number one, Sikhism has certainly found a comfortable position within India today to some extent. For example, the Prime Minister of India nowadays is a Sikh. He's a man who is a Singh. His name is Singh, and is certainly somebody who professes to be Sikh himself. He doesn't. It's not just cultural. He is a practicing Sikh. The other issue, though, is that this creates an idea that there should be a homeland for Sikhs. Sikhs start to want a place, like the movement Zionism that you read about when we were dealing with Judaism. And in Sikhism, the place is usually referred to as Khalistan. Khalistan is not a real place anywhere on a map. It's this notion, this imagined place of a homeland where Sikhs can have their own country, where they can create their own government, where they can participate fully in things and have their own society without having to be subject to a whatever, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, whatever you want to fill in the blank, society that is that they're just a subset within. All right, well, that's about all we really need to talk about with Sikhism anyway. It's a relatively short chapter here, and you can fill in the blanks from the book. I'll leave you with that, and I will see you when we deal with the videos for chapter number 12. Take care.